Hello and welcome to today's fireside chat on Azure Hybrid Benefit for Linux. My name is Carl O'Doherty. I'm a principal Microsoft licensing consultant here at Version 1. On today's fireside chat, I'm joined by my colleague Richard, who's I think it's probably fair to say, our resident in-house licensing specialist for all things Linux. How are you doing today, Richard?
I'm very well, Carl. How are you?
Good. I'm not too bad at all. I'm not too bad. Looking forward to getting into this interesting topic.
Mm,
Might actually help organizations save a few euros, dollars, pounds, whatever it is you're spending money in on Azure these days. So, to give this a bit of context, a lot of people out there will be familiar with the concept of Azure Hybrid Benefit for Windows Server or for SQL Server.
mm,
As we all know, or you may not know, it's a software assurance benefit. And in effect, what it allows you to do is to, when applied into licensing that are covered with Azure Hybrid Benefit, when applied into Azure, it allows you to remove the software rental fees associated with Windows Server or SQL Server databases. Um, in the recent past, Microsoft made this announcement and brought to market this new Azure Hybrid Benefit offering, which is focused on Linux. And I think a lot of organizations out there who are using Linux actually haven't fully realized this benefit, and they're actually missing out on potential cost savings. In this fireside chat, we'll go into a little bit of detail around how do you get at this benefit and what are the things that you need to consider around the use of the benefit. Um, so, Richard, going to pass it over to you. When we say Linux, that means many things to many people. So, in the
mm.
context of this particular benefit, what does it actually give you in terms of an operating system? You know, is it specific to a small subset of operating systems, or is this
Yeah,
broad offering?
I, Microsoft have been quite um, restrictive here, and they've only restricted it to Red Hat and SUSE Linux customers who want to deploy their workloads in Azure. So it's really just those two guys.
Okay, okay, so it's pretty straightforward to understand. So, right?
Yes, yeah.
I think the observation that I'm seeing out there in the marketplace when we're working with organizations to help them right size their spend in Azure or all things cloud for that matter, is that a lot of organizations when it's come to those two particular operating systems in Azure, they've kind of gone with the flow and they've done the pay as you go thing without
Mm.
actually understanding what are the pathways to licensing that technology in Azure? And in doing so, they probably haven't taken the time to understand exactly what do their existing on-premise entitlements provide them with, and how does that translate into Azure? And as a consequence, I think we're probably seeing, that's where the missed cost saving opportunity is
Yeah.
taking place.
Yeah, I mean, we're not too dissimilar from what the work you do on Microsoft already. Azure Hybrid Benefit for Linux, one of the main benefits is that you reduce your cost. For example, in the absence of Azure Hybrid Benefit for Linux, a customer deploying a VM in Azure running Red Hat's Enterprise Linux or SUSE Linux Enterprise Server is charged by default on a pay-as-you-go model. And that fee, that pay-as-you-go fee combines the compute cost and the OS rental cost. By taking advantage of AHB for Linux, you waive the OS rental fees, and that allows you to bring your own OS. Also, obviously, this benefits you in a case where you're migrating an existing workload that is already licensed on premise. You are then allowed or you're able to bring your existing subscription into Azure rather than going with pay-as-you-go model where you're paying for the subscription while maintaining the existing on-premise subscription you have. So you sweat the assets rather than double paying.
Okay, so I'm going to stick my license compliance hat on there, right? And
Mm,
I suppose it's probably worth, talking about, and maybe you can give us some insights around how do you actually configure this thing. But I suppose organizations need to be aware, as I always say, cloud doesn't automatically solve all of your license compliance
mm,
problems. So I think it's probably fair to say that you need to be aware of, if you are going to start to use some of those assets that you've licensed on premise and start to leverage Azure Hybrid Benefit for Linux, you need to be aware of potentially the lack of dual use rights, for example. Um,
mhm.
because there is that risk that you might be actually taking entitlement from the on-premise world, pushing it into Azure, but then all of a sudden creating some shortfalls within your on-premise environment. So, like I said at the start of this fireside chat, when you've identified that you've got the capability to use Azure Hybrid Benefit for Linux, it's really important that you understand and take stock of your on-premise environment before you start to leverage that benefit. The benefits of that are twofold, right? Because you'll probably identify where there's waste and redundancy in your on-premise estate, and that actually might help you reduce some of your support and licensing costs on the on-premise world. But at the same time, it might actually start to show you where you've got surplus entitlement that you can bring to Azure and start to realize this cost saving that we're talking about. So configuration, right? I'm guessing, from what I've seen, and you're the Linux guy, but when I've looked at this before, there's an element of configuration. There is a certain amount of gating here, and that you've got to configure this benefit at the Azure portal level, as
Mhm.
well as equivalent portals for Red Hat and SUSE as well, right? So it's not just I have this entitlement and now I'm going to go off and use it. There's an element of configuration here that people need to be
Yeah.
aware.
Yeah, you're right. And this is something I think our customers and people need to be aware of. There is a configuration process that has to take place on both the Azure side and Red Hat or SUSE, like you said. For Red Hat, you just need to register under the Red Hat Cloud Access Program. And for SUSE, you need to register your subscriptions, whether you've purchased it directly with SUSE or with a partner, you need to register it under the SUSE Customer Center. Now, once the registration is complete, you can then convert any existing pay-as-you-go workloads to use Azure Hybrid Benefit for Linux, and then use bring your own subscription. And then you can go in the opposite direction as well if you want to. Wherever you're using bring your own subscription, you can then go back to pay-as-you-go. So there is that flexibility then.
Yeah.
Now, AHB for Linux can also be used in conjunction with standard images for Red Hat Enterprise Linux and SUSE Linux Enterprise OSs from the Azure Marketplace. Just another little nuggets to drop in there.
Yeah, there's one, I suppose, one really interesting point there, right? Is that you can start to use this benefit now if you haven't enabled it already, or you
Hmm.
revert back if you
Correct.
find that it's not actually delivering the right cost savings, or that there's other factors at play that
Hmm.
not necessarily driving the cost savings that you perceive that you would get. So, I think the ship hasn't sailed. If you're not using this benefit right now, you can start to quickly enable it and see those cost savings within the next month's
Hmm.
billing cycle, right? So that's a really important thing to call out. Um, Conscious of time, right? So considerations, other things that are out there, right? I think, and I'm just going to throw one at you, just because see what you think of this. But
Hmm.
when I've positioned this benefit to organizations as something that they should be using, one of the biggest things that I get back from organizations is, well, what about support? It's kind of like, well, the pay as you go is nice and easy. It's supported by Microsoft, and if it ain't broke, then don't try fix it. But like, how are we going to be supported if we do the BYOL option? Is there going to be shortcomings? What are your thoughts on that one? What do you advise
Yeah.
organizations?
The support question needs to be looked into carefully by individual companies. Now, from what is available online and what we've read from Red Hat and SUSE, the way the support model works is if you're going with a BYOS and you've purchased your subscription directly with the vendor, your support is directly with them. Whereas if you go with a pay-as-you-go model, you're going with Azure as your first line of support or Microsoft as your first line of support before you then get into Red Hat or SUSE. And this is an important distinction, right? Especially for Sev 1, Sev 2 issues where you need immediate and quick support. This, however, does not say that Microsoft cannot respond or resolve your issues as quickly. However, I've always found it's better to go directly to the owners of the products rather than going through a third party, right? So that's a consideration to keep in mind. Another thing to also keep in mind is that where you're going with a pay-as-you-go model, you might begin to lose some of your relationships with account managers and tech support with Red Hat or with SUSE that you may have built over many years. Because once you start going with a pay-as-you-go model, you're probably not purchasing as many subscriptions as you would have in the past. The relationships begin to reduce, those contacts begin to drop. So it's important to assess it not just from who is supporting me, but also assess it from how quickly can I get my support, what relationships do we already have in place that we already tap into, and just to make sure you don't lose any of those little nuances that come in to help when you have issues. Yeah.
So lots of interesting considerations to take into account there. So I think probably makes sense for us to drop a few relevant links into the description for this video with some product
Correct. Yeah.
documentation so that, individuals out there can drill down into this in a little bit more detail. So I am conscious this is a fireside chat. It's 10 to 15 minutes of quick fire insights on relevant Microsoft licensing related topics. If you've got any questions off the back of today's session, or for that matter, if you have any Microsoft licensing related queries or licensing related queries across a broad range of other vendors, do reach out to the software asset management team at version 1 here. We would be delighted to help. So until the next time we see you on our next fireside chat, thanks for taking the time to listen to us today, and hopefully you can go and take some of this information and start to realize some of those cost savings tomorrow. Thank you.